doctor, but yeah. Okay, so with that, I wanted to introduce Dr. Monica Arienzo. She's an associate research professor in the Division of Hydrologic Sciences at the Desert Research Institute. She earned a bachelor's at Franklin and Marshall College in Pennsylvania and a doctoral degree in marine geology and geophysics from the University of Miami. In her research, Monica uses chemical tools to understand how humans have impacted the environment, studies caves in the Bahamas, and ice cores in Antarctica, and now studies microplastics from peak to the tap. Her microplastics research focuses on microplastics found in snowy peaks to downstream lakes and rivers to drinking water taps, and collaborates with a lot of different people, including researchers and more than 25 volunteer citizen scientists as well. So with that, I will we'll bring it over to ACMI and introduce Dr. Monica Arienzo. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Let's see if we got it.
What did you do, Todd?
Here we go. Okay, great.
Don't touch anything.
Thank you. Thank you all. It's been a real pleasure to be here today. It's been a really fun break from the real cold temperatures we've had in Reno. And so today I'm going to be talking about work we're doing studying plastic pollution in the Truckee River watershed. If you're not familiar with the Truckee River, I'll share more about that. Before I do, I wanted to thank the students and collaborators that have helped me with this work. I have two students, Hannah and Julia. You'll be hearing about their contributions to this project. And then we've been collaborating with a bunch of other individuals from Clean Up the Lake, a nonprofit from Lake Tahoe. And a lot of this work has been funded through the National Science Foundation, as well as through the Nevada Division of State Lands. In the background here, you can see beautiful Lake Tahoe. So I'll be talking a little bit about the plastic pollution we've been studying there. The Desert Research Institute is a research institute that's part of the Nevada system of higher education. So what that means is that I have students, both undergraduate and graduate students in my group. And so you can see some of them here. Rachel and Hannah are the two students that do most of the plastic research. Carrie does work on fires, and then Angelique's an undergraduate at UNR who works in my group, and she's been helping a lot with all of the projects. So, what more do I want to say? So, the work I'll be talking about today is a really applicable sort of science, and there's a lot of opportunities to get into plastic pollution research if you're interested in that. So, today I'll be dividing my talk into two parts. I'm going to talk about macroplastics, which are the big pieces of plastic, the litter, the plastics you all interact with every day. The second part of my talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about microplastics, which are the small pieces of plastic that are smaller than 5 millimeters, or about smaller than the size of a pencil eraser. So these ones are the ones we need a microscope to study. And what I'll be showing you is that in Lake Tahoe, when we look at the submerged plastic pollution, so the plastic pollution that we find at the bottom of Lake Tahoe, we find plastics in every one of the transects we conducted. We also found that the dominant types of plastics were plastic bags and single-use plastic. And it was really hard to compare this study to really anything else because not much has been done looking at the bottoms of lakes and what plastic pollution is down there. And then I'll switch and I'll talk about the microplastic research we're working on, and I'll be showing you just a little teaser of some of the results so far. But this is really kind of the work we're focusing right now on, is on the smaller pieces of plastic. So before I dive in, let's talk some definitions. So what are plastics? There's a lot of debate within the community on what actually defines a plastics. And actually the California Water Board has probably come up with the most comprehensive and robust definition for this. But for purposes for today, we'll be talking about synthetic solid materials that are made up of polymers. These can then be shaped to form different, these can then be molded to form different shapes. And so here you can see some of those common plastics you may be able to identify from those numbers at the bottoms of your cups and so on. The other term I'll be using is macroplastics. So these are those big pieces of plastics that you interact with. We refer to these as anything bigger than 5 millimeters, but really think of this as the stuff you interact with. This is a photo from one of the cleanups I'll be talking in more detail about later. Then I'll use the term microplastics, which is anything smaller than that pencil eraser, down to about 1 micron in size. And 1 micron is about the size of our bacteria. So again, things we can see with the naked eye, but then things we also need a microscope to see. So one of the things I always like to remind everyone whenever I talk about plastic pollution is this is a really big class of pollutants, right? These, I talked about kind of size differences, right? So from the plastics you can see to those that you need a microscope to see. We have variation in shape and color, right? Just think about the plastics in this room, the variations in shape and color. But then also when we start thinking about microplastics, the shape and the colors maybe are important, maybe in how these shapes are moving. And so here are some examples of some microplastics we found under the microscope where you can see they may be a fragment, a fiber, or a pellet, that green pellet in there. Those might be moving differently throughout the environment. And then, of course, variations in chemical makeup. So those numbers on the bottoms of your cups, for example, those indicate slightly different chemistries. And so the chemical makeup of the plastics is going to impact their physical and chemical properties. And so how those plastics interact with the environment is going to vary. The toxicity may also vary. What's going to absorb or desorb from that plastic is going to vary as well. And so these are, this is a really wide class of pollutants with a lot of different things that change about them. And so we really need to consider this when we are designing our scientific experiments, when we're, and then when we're taking them back to the lab and we start to analyze our results. So this is kind of a fun demo. I like to always show people just to kind of bring it all together. This is water, and this is 2 different types of plastics in the water, in the jar of water. And the first thing you can see is that the white plastics float and the black plastics sink. And so when we're designing our field experiments, we have to keep in mind that some plastics are going to float in water and some are going to sink. And so we may end up with some biases potentially in our sampling. We can also use this to our advantage in the laboratory. We can change the density of this water, and then we can make all of our plastics float. And then we can use that in some ways to our advantage in the lab. So the project that we're talking about today is focusing on plastic pollution in the Truckee River watershed. So we have, this is sort of a nice example of showing how plastics may be moving throughout the Truckee River watershed, where we can start with in the snow, where we have atmospheric deposition or human impacts that may be resulting in microplastics or plastic pollution in our snowpack. We then can have runoff. We can have human activities like driving around the lake or residential inputs. We can also have the breakdown of bigger pieces of plastic that create smaller ones, and so on. So this is just to give you an idea of some of the ways we think plastics may be moving in our watershed. But really we need to do more research to understand these, the fate and the transport of these pollutants. So ultimately, why are we interested in studying plastics? Well, those big pieces of plastics, those macroplastics, can break down and form smaller and smaller pieces. We now know that plastics can break down into the nanometer size range. They can be nanoplastics. And so this is something that is really of interest to a lot of research, is the breakdown of bigger pieces to smaller and smaller, and then how they can enter into our food web. These these pieces of plastic can also have contaminants that can absorb onto those pieces, so they can basically act as sort of like a Trojan horse, where they may be bringing other contaminants into, say, an an organism or into another part of a watershed, for example. And then, of course, they can be consumed by animals, or animals can become ensnared in plastics. So I do a lot of work in Southeast Asia, where we work a lot with fisheries. And one of their concerns is that are the fish getting stuck in the plastics, in the plastic bags, for example. And we do tend to find a lot of fish in bags. And so this is sort of why we're interested in studying this, but my research is really focused throughout my career on trying to understand how we as humans are impacting the environment and using chemistry to do that. And so this was a perfect next step in my research path, and I got funding to do it, so hence why I started on this research path myself. Okay, so let's talk about where I'm doing this research. This is the Truckee River watershed. Many of you have maybe heard or even maybe have been to Lake Tahoe, not too far from here, about 2 hours away. Lake Tahoe is, if you haven't been there, beautiful, ultra-oligotrophic lake, has very clear waters. It's known for the clarity of the lake. The lake itself is fed from snowmelt from the surrounding Sierra Nevada peaks, which this time of year, great to go skiing there. And then the outflow of Lake Tahoe, it is dammed. The outflow is the Truckee River. And the Truckee River flows downstream to Reno and Sparks, where I live. It serves as a major drinking water resource for those areas. And then eventually it makes its way to Pyramid Lake, which is a terminal lake, meaning that the river ends at the lake. Pyramid Lake is the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe is located there, and so you're starting to see there's a lot of different uses of this water, and as probably you all know, water in the U.S., in the Western U.S. in particular, is very really important to our everyday lives. So we focus on this watershed not only because it's my backyard and I'm interested in understanding pollutants in my own backyard, but also because it's a very well-studied watershed. We have a lot of research that's going on at Lake Tahoe. I also serve on the Lake Tahoe Science Advisory Council, so I also have a vested interest in studying this system. It is snow-fed, so that's an important part of thinking about where our water's coming from and where it's moving to. It's by state, so that means that it both serves communities in California as well as in Nevada. And then there's a lot of user groups of this water, from tourism and recreation around Lake Tahoe itself, to the endangered and threatened aquatic species that live in the Truckee River and Pyramid Lake, as well as Lake Tahoe. The cities around Lake Tahoe and then downstream where I live in Reno. And then we have the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe, who are ultimately where the water ends, right? So everything we put into the water ends up on tribal land. And then, of course, like many of our Western cities, we have pressures from development and climate change, right? Lithium is the really big topic right now. Mining lithium is huge in Nevada, and so for our surface waters, we're really worried about those impacts and the development that's going to happen associated with that. And then, of course, climate change. As we move, in particular in this part of the U.S., as we move from having a snow-dominated system to a rain-dominated system, that's going to also affect how pollutants move throughout our watershed. So all of these things make this a really interesting watershed to study, but also it's my backyard, so that's why I like to study it too. All right, so let's talk about some of the research we're doing. The first bit of research I'm going to talk about is the microplastic pollution in Lake Tahoe, so these big pieces of trash in Tahoe. And I want to give a really big shout out to Julia Davidson. She was a UNR chemistry major. She started with me in her sophomore year, and we now have a paper that we're working on together. So she graduated last year, and she really has all of the data I'll be showing in this part of the talk was actually generated by an undergraduate researcher, and so There's, like I mentioned, a lot of opportunities, no matter where you are in your career, to do research in plastic pollution, and a great starting place is undergraduate if you're undergrads. And so this was work in partnership with UC Davis and Clean Up the Lake, a nonprofit based in Lake Tahoe. And what this nonprofit, these are some of our research goals. I'm not going to go too much into them, but we really cater the project to Julia's interests in chemistry, to really design the questions we had around sort of her related chemistry background. So we worked with this nonprofit called Clean Up the Lake. This is a group of scuba divers who now are circumnavigating Lake Tahoe. At the time, this was their first project. But what they wanted to do was to scuba dive at parallel to shoreline of the entire Lake Tahoe and collect all of the litter that was down there. And so they were new to the area, and so we said, hey, how about we start with 5 different transects that total about 5 miles. And let's start with something simple, and just doable, so 5 miles. And we worked with them, they applied for some funding, and they got it. And so they were able to start with these 5 locations you can see here. The dots indicate stopping and starting locations, and the lines are the actual transects they took. And they collected all of this litter and brought it back to the surface. Now they've completed a full circumnavigation of Lake Tahoe, and so there's a lot more data, but I'm just going to focus on these 5 locations. They collect all of the trash, but for this study we only focused on the plastic trash. And so what happens is they bring this trash to the surface. So here you can see the diver collecting the trash in this little basket. It's then brought to the surface. They then weigh all that litter. And then we have a great team of volunteers, including researchers like Julia, as well as my own graduate students and myself. We went up there and we sorted all the trash for each location by category. And so we used a standard protocol developed by the UNEP IOC. And this protocol, basically, you divide it into, first, what is it made of? So plastic, metal, wood, ceramic, and so on. We then have these subcategories. So here you see 2 examples. The first one up top, that's the food containers category. So you can see a lot of solo cups, right? Tahoe's a big party place, not really surprising we're seeing solo cups. And then PLO2, the one down here, those are our bottles less than 2 liters. So these are our water bottles, right? Again, not surprising. We have a lot of boaters on Lake Tahoe, probably drinking and then throwing their waste into the lake. But we did this for all of the litter we found. So we have a lot of aluminum drink cans and so on. But for this study, we only focused on the plastic. We then take little pieces of those plastic litter that we found. Julia kept them in each of their categories. So for each location, we have the category and a subsample of the plastic. She then took it back to UNR, where she measured it using a Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy instrument. You may be wondering what that is. But basically, this is a pretty simple instrument. It uses infrared light to excite whatever you're putting in the instrument. It then measures the absorbance of that infrared light, and how that light gets absorbed is actually dependent on what the material is. So what is it made of? What's the molecular structure of that material? And so we end up with something and so then we use this basically to identify our unknown. And so we end up with something that looks like this. On the x-axis here, you're looking at wave number. And on the y-axis, you're looking at that absorbance. And so this is basically a fingerprint for this piece of what looks like maybe a plastic straw. And this is what she measured. And then she takes this measurement and she compares it, or the instrument, compares it to a library of known fingerprints. And then it tells you how good of a match is it to other known things. So in this case, it matched highest with polyethylene. And so then she uses that, we use that as our known. So this unknown, now we have identified it as a polyethylene, which is a type of plastic. So she did this for about 525 pieces of plastic. So quite a lot of work she did. I'm currently compiling it all, and so I can tell you she did a lot of work. But it's also a really useful data set because now, not only we have these libraries we can compare to, but the other cool thing is that now we have all of these cool plastics that we've already identified from Lake Tahoe that now we can use other things. We can use them in other experiments as well. So it's really cool. She's created this great library now of 525 plastics from Lake Tahoe. So this is what those sorting events with Clean Up the Lake looks like. We lay out all of the trash at once, and then we go through and sort it category by category. We have these giant tarps we lay out, and that's what we actually do the sorting on. Each category gets weighed and counted. So for each category, if it's, say, those plastic water bottles, we know the weight of plastic for each location, and then we also know the amount, the count of plastic bottles. So you can see there's a lot of stuff on here. Plastics is only one small component. I think I already mentioned that. But you can see aluminum drink cans, so beer cans, soda cans. That's actually by weight, some of our bigger categories from the litter. But then we've also found things like tires and anchors and stuff like that as well that weighs a lot. Okay, so what did we find? The first kind of big observation that first big thing we found is that every transect had plastic litter, which was, I guess, a little disappointing because I was really hoping we weren't going to find so much plastic. So I was surprised that we found so much plastic litter at the bottom of Lake Tahoe. The sites with the greatest counts of plastic litter were the three located in the northern part of the lake, so up here. And we think that that's because these are areas that are high visitation areas, so there's a state park there, there's some marinas located in that part of Tahoe, and it's also definitely more urbanized in that part of Tahoe. There's a lot of residential areas. So a lot of human activity, resulting in probably a lot of plastic making its way to the bottom of Tahoe. This is, by count, the most abundant of those plastic categories. What you'll notice, the first thing you'll notice is other plastic is our highest by count, which was a little disappointing, right, because you really hope that your litter will fall into a category. And there's a couple of reasons for this. This is the first time we had done this in Tahoe, and we realized we needed to add a new category called PVC pipes. Interestingly, we didn't think that that would be important, but it turns out that there were quite a few PVC pipes that were found at the bottom of Tahoe. Another litter is also the stuff you just can't identify. It's the broken down pieces of whatever, bags or bottles. And if you can't for sure say it came from a bottle, we put it in other. So we also broke this into bigger than a hand and smaller than a hand to also help kind of get at how much of this is just stuff that's broken down beyond identification. The next most abundant plastic litter category was our food containers. So these are your to-go cups, your to-go, your sandwich, those clamshells and things like that. The next one was plastic bags, unsurprising, right? We've been using plastic bags for a while. Next was toys, and toys in this case was used sort of broadly to mean kind of any sort of like snorkeling gear or anything that was like beach toys. So again, not surprising because we have a lot of people who are swimming in Lake Tahoe. The fourth most common, or fifth most common was in count, was bottles, less than 2 liters. Those are your plastic water bottles. Again, not surprising. And then you can see we also have some fishing-related litter as well, like fishing line and other fishing gear. So, not really surprising when you think about the activities that are occurring around Lake Tahoe, But I wanted to do a quick comparison to prior studies. But this is where I ran into some problems because there's not much has been done looking at litter in lakes that's been submerged. So that's at the lake bed. So the closest things I could find to compare to was from a nice compilation that Carmen Morales Castedas did in 2021. And this was published in Nature and Sustainability. And you can see they did a nice compilation of litter found on riverbeds and then litter found near shore on the seafloor. And so you can see some similarities, right? A lot of sort of single-use plastic, with there being in riverbeds, caps and lids, plastic water bottles, and then we see some fishing-related plastics, and then some plastic bags. So kind of similar to what we saw in Tahoe, which is interesting. Near shore seafloor, we see a lot of plastic bags, food wrappers, plastic bottles, and then fishing-related and food containers. Again, pretty similar to what we're seeing in Tahoe. So this is sort of interesting because maybe it's starting to tell a story about what we should expect in other lakes. Maybe it's going to look like a near-shore seafloor environment, which would be kind of interesting when we start to think about how plastics are moving in our rivers and our waterways. So this is now, so that's sort of one thing we looked at. The other thing we looked at, as I mentioned, was Julia did this cool FTIR work where she identified the types of plastics that make up this trash. And the reason why we wanted to do this is because the type of plastic can be really important when we start to think about toxicity of the plastics if they're being ingested. And as we start to think of how those plastics may be transporting other contaminants in the environment. Also, Julie was a chemistry major, and so she was super interested in this, so we went with it. But actually, the trends are sort of really interesting. The first type of plastic she identified most commonly was polyvinyl chloride. This has actually gotten quite a bit of news recently because it's part of the train derailment that occurred in East Palestine, Ohio. And so that's sort of an aside, but we identified a lot of polyvinyl chloride. We think it's related to those PVC pipes we were finding in our litter, so that's interesting. The next most common type of plastic we found was polyethylene terephthalate. This is what makes up your water bottles. Not surprising, because water bottles were a really big litter component. Next one was polystyrene. So these are your styrofoam cups, your styrofoam, what are they called? Like ice coolers. Right? Again, not really that surprising when we think about the activities that are happening around Tahoe. And also a lot of people don't realize, but even like the solo cups, those are actually made of polystyrene. So polystyrene has quite a few uses beyond just being a foam container. And then the fourth most common was polyethylene, which makes up a lot of our plastic bags and some of our harder types of plastic bottles. So the first comparison I wanted to do is compare it to results from other bottoms of lakes, which there weren't any. So instead, let's compare to global production of plastics. And when we compare the top most commonly produced plastics around the world are the same as the ones that we've identified most commonly in our Lake Tahoe. So generally speaking, the plastics that we're identifying in Lake Tahoe reflect global production trends of plastic. Not surprising, but kind of nice that we're seeing similarities. So this is sort of all based again on this work that Julia's been doing, making all these measurements. And so in summary, what we find is that polyvinyl chloride, which is those PVC pipes, and polyethylene terephthalate, which are our water bottles, those are the most commonly observed plastics in Lake Tahoe from the litter data. We find that most of the macroplastics are from single-use plastics and human activities around the lake. And educational campaigns about the proper disposal of these certain types of plastics is probably going to be a really good next step for us. But but also working with companies, businesses around the lake, and trying to encourage them to replace these with maybe reusable items. So reusable water bottles is a great step for us to take, and getting those food containers to be reusable as well. So that's sort of what we're working on next, is to help get the word out about what we found so far in this data set. Okay, so that summarizes the work we've been doing studying the big pieces of plastic in the lake. And so now I'm going to switch gears and talk about the small pieces of plastic. And I don't have much data. This is kind of be more of like a fun showing you all some maps and talking a little bit more about methodology, because this is sort of the new work we're doing right now. So in my group, when we are sampling for microplastics in the Truckee River, in our watershed in particular, we have sort of three ways we've been doing this. We've been looking at surface water, we've been looking at snow, and then we've also been doing some citizen science work. So this is getting the citizens involved in sample collection, and then we do the analysis in our lab. I'm not going to talk about the citizen science today, because that's sort of a project we've kind of wrapped up, and we're at the phase of deciding what the next step is. Instead, I'm going to focus on water and snow. And so first, on the water side, this is being led by Hannah, a master's student that started with me this year. She's in the UNR graduate program of hydrologic sciences. And she came to me, she was really, really interested in studying microplastics export along the lower Colorado, so understanding how many microplastics are moving from the US to Mexico from the lower Colorado, which is a great idea, and we're hopefully going to be doing that as well. But the deal we made was she could do that as long as she helped give us some Truckee River work. So she's really jumped into this work, which is great. Yeah, so this is going to be one part of her master's thesis. So as I mentioned, Hannah started this fall, and she jumped right into the project, and she actually started sampling pretty much within a week or two of arriving in Reno, which was really impressive because she was balancing school and moving. She moved from the Midwest, which, you know, Reno could be an adjustment. Any graduate school and moving can be an adjustment. So very impressive. She jumped right in, and she started sampling 9 sites along the Truckee River. So here again is Lake Tahoe, where we were just talking about, where those plastics we were studying. She sampled right at the outlet, and then she sampled all the way downstream in the Truckee River. So she has 9 sites she started sampling this fall, and they've been selected specifically to be above and below urbanized areas, to be near our intakes for our drinking water, because the Truckee River is our source of drinking water for Reno and Sparks. Near outflows of wastewater treatment, because we know wastewater treatment can be a source of microplastics to waterways. And yeah, so that's sort of how we chose these sites. Really excited. On my drive over here yesterday, I got news that the Pyramid Lake Paiute Tribe has approved our collaboration with them to sample along the on their lands along the Truckee River. So we'll have 2 more sites here along this part of the Truckee River, and then we'll have 1 more at Pyramid Lake. So we'll get the full watershed basically from the outflow of Tahoe all the way to the terminal lake, which is very exciting for us. And it's super exciting because these sites are going to be paired with their long-term monitoring as well that they've been doing. And so it's really cool to have a collaboration with the Pyramid Lake Paiute Tribe and to be starting that collaboration. Very excited for it. So we've been sampling here. As I mentioned, she arrived in the fall. She started sampling right away. And the idea was to capture sort of the low flows that we get in the fall before we end up with these winter storms. This winter's been super interesting. We had a bunch of really high flow events in the Truckee River this winter, but she's going to get back out there and sample this spring along all these sites and then add in those sites at Pyramid Lake. This is what it looks like when she's sampling. We basically do near shore surface sampling for microplastics, where we have a little pump here, and she has a tube that goes out to the middle of the river. So here she's attaching the tube to this piece of rebar. That pumps water through filters, and then that's what we bring back to the laboratory. So this is sort of just a little schematic showing this is what it kind of looks like when we're sampling, where there's an inlet, the pump, and then our filters are on the other end. We then take those filters back. We do a series of steps to remove all of the other stuff that's in there. So there's going to be algae, bugs, and there's also going to be sediment, so we have to get rid of all that stuff. And then the last thing we do is that same thing that Julia did to identify those types of plastics in our samples. We do that on our samples as well. So she'll go through and use our microscope-enabled FTIR to look at those really small pieces of plastics in our samples. So if you're interested in sort of the methods we use, we published this paper in ESMT Water earlier last year. And the thing about this sampling approach is it's all things you can buy off the shelf, and we did it on purpose because, you know, not all of us have lots of money to create new things. So we use all off-the-shelf tools to have this sampling approach. It's super easy. It can be easily incorporated into classes and other things like that. So you have to invite me back so I can update you all on Hannah's progress during her thesis, but she'll be hopefully getting out there in the next month or two as we start having snow melt. So the other big thing this is sort of my pet project, is this microplastics in snow. So as the snow accumulates in the Sierra Nevada, it's going to be incorporating all sorts of pollutants, including microplastics. And some of you maybe know my background is also in studying ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica, and so part of my desire to study the snow is to someday hopefully study microplastics in Greenland and Antarctica. So like I said, this is sort of my pet project. But this picture is a photo of me at one of the ski resorts, actually sampling the snowpack for microplastics. Because one of my interests is how do the microplastics vary from high human activities to areas that are much more remote. And snow is a great recorder of what's happening in the environment around it. So these light green, there are these green dots here. These are all the snow study sites we sampled last year. We sort of selected remote backcountry areas that you have to either snowshoe to, or if you're a backcountry skier, you can backcountry ski to some of these places. We also sampled at ski resorts, again, to kind of have the other end of that anthropogenic impacts. And we're super lucky. We have 2 UC snow monitoring stations in our area, and so we are able to leverage those snow monitoring stations as well. So that's super exciting. So we can sample those. All of these sites were sampled last March, and I'll be revisiting many of them this coming month as well. We do mostly snow coring. So this is the last picture was maybe a better picture, but here this is actually up at Mammoth Mountain. This is the barrel of the snow core. So it's a 1 meter barrel. It goes down 1 meter. I lift it up out of the snow. I extract the snow that's in that barrel, and then I have an extension I can put on there to go down up to 5 meters if I wanted to. Which at the time I thought, wow, 5 meters. I'm never going to use that, but maybe this winter. We bring this. You can see I also wear a lab coat. So one of the big concerns we have is contaminating our own samples, right? A lot of what we wear, this shirt is definitely plastic. My pants probably have plastic in them. So a lot of what we wear probably has plastic in it. So we try to take a lot of steps to eliminate contamination. I try to always wear the same clothes. I can tell you, those pants, pretty stinky by the end of the season, right? But we do that so if we start to see red fibers showing up, that's probably coming from my clothes because I wore the same clothes. We take the snow cores back to the lab, we melt them, we filter them, and then we look at those filters under our microscope. This is sort of how that filter system works. It's not very high tech, it's just all stainless steel. And we do that again because we want to reduce chances of contaminating our samples. we go through the same steps that Hannah will go through in her sample processing. We want to remove any of the organics, so believe it or not, snow is pretty dirty. I do not eat snow anymore. So we do a hydrogen peroxide step where we remove organic material. We also remove sediments, because there's also sediments that can be in our snow samples, so we remove that. And then again, we'll put them through our microscope and look at the actual types of plastics. So some sort of preliminary data. This is older data, because I haven't really had much time yet to process the samples from last year. But we've seen a lot of color from fibers so far in our samples. We think that these ones, for example, were from snow from Sage-Hen, actually. This is one of the UC study sites. And these were made of nylon and rayon. And so again, these are plastics. And so the next question is, if we continue to find these, then where are they coming from? And that's sort of what we're going to hopefully work on, and hopefully by looking at the spatial variations, hopefully we can start to get at sources. So this is looking at, this is time on the x-axis. On the y-axis, this is what's called snow water equivalent. This is from a snow tell station. Basically, there are these stations all across the Sierras that tell us how much snow there is. It's really important for water managers so they know what to expect coming downstream. This is from the Melrose ski area, so this is on the east side of Lake Tahoe. And I'm showing this because last winter when I sampled, it was, this red line was last winter. And I want to say at Mount Rose, maybe we had a little bit over a meter of snow. This winter, we're this black line here. And so I'm going to sample here. So I'm going to have a lot of snow. I'm going to have several meters. I think I calculated I'll probably end up with about 30 meters of snow if I revisit all these 9 sites. It takes me a lot of time to process each sample, so this is going to be a lot of work. And this is where undergraduates come in handy. My grad students will come in handy this winter. So I'm going to need probably to take a sled with me this year. It's probably going to be a lot more work to get to these sites and collect these samples. There's also a lot of freezer storage space that I'll need to kindly ask my colleagues for. This is another one, another snow tell site from Tahoe. This is now looking at the West Shore. West Shore tends to get more snow. But again, this is where we were last winter when I sampled, and you can see where we are this earlier this week. So a lot of snow, record-breaking snow. We have another storm coming this week, and then we have another huge storm coming next week. So it's going to be a lot of work. So just to wrap up, you know, we looked at the submerged plastics in Tahoe. We found plastics at every site. They were primarily dominated by plastic bags, bottles, and single-use plastics. Our microplastic is ongoing, and we're really going to keep an eye out to see if we're going to continue to find those fibers in our samples, or maybe we'll start to see some more diversity as we dive into our samples some more. But really, what we hope is that we can really help inform both regional policies around plastic use and also global policies. So regionally, in South Lake Tahoe is considering some plastic bans in the city of South Lake Tahoe. And so the more data we can help to use to inform those policies, the more effective we can design our policies to be. And globally, the UN has drafted a resolution to end plastic pollution. And so this would be a legally binding international approach to reducing plastic pollution. The primary focus is really plastic pollution reaching the oceans, but it all starts on land, right? So all of this work we really hope can help inform not only those local policies, but also hopefully inform where these more international laws can go moving forward. So with that, thank you. This is my group after one of our local cleanup efforts. Happy to take any questions. My email's here. You can get around to your question.